It was the kind of neighborhood where people still waved at each other, kids played outside until dusk, and front porches buzzed with weekend barbecues. My neighbor, Mr. Henderson, was a cornerstone of this idyllic community, a retired engineer in his late 60s, always cheerful and quick to help. To me, he was a kind old man with a knack for fixing things. But that all changed on a quiet Sunday afternoon. I was cleaning my living room when I noticed it, something shiny tucked behind a potted plant on my bookshelf. Curiosity made me reach out, but dread gripped me as I held the tiny device in my hands. A hidden camera. My heart pounded as I scanned the room, paranoia creeping in. Who had placed it there, and why? As the hours passed and more cameras were uncovered, my shock turned to fear. The only person with regular access to my home was Mr. Henderson. Could he be responsible? That evening, I stood at his doorstep, my stomach twisting in knots. He greeted me with his usual warm smile, but something was different now. Behind that friendly facade, I began to sense a darkness I'd never imagined. Little did I know, this confrontation was just the beginning. I sat at my dining table, the hidden cameras laid out before me like pieces of an unsolved puzzle. Sarah, my best friend, sat across from me, her brow furrowed as she examined the devices. "These are high-end," she murmured, turning one over in her hands. "Whoever set these up knew what they were doing." Her words only deepened my anxiety. Mr. Henderson was a retired engineer. The thought gnawed at me like a persistent itch. I shook my head, trying to focus. "It doesn't make sense, Sarah," I said, my voice shaky. "Why would he do this? He's always been so kind, so normal." Sarah leaned forward. "Sometimes the people we least suspect are the ones hiding the most." The weight of her words hung in the air as we discussed next steps. She suggested calling the police, but I hesitated. What if I was wrong? What if accusing him destroyed an innocent man's reputation? "I'll confront him," I decided, though the thought terrified me. I need answers first. That evening, I walked to Mr. Henderson's house, clutching the cameras in a trembling hand. His porch light flickered warmly, casting long shadows on the neatly trimmed hedges. When he opened the door, his cheerful demeanor felt almost mocking. "Hello there, what brings you over?" he asked, his voice as inviting as always. I swallowed hard, holding up the cameras. "I found these in my house. Do you know anything about them?" His smile faltered for just a moment, a fleeting flicker of something unreadable. Then he chuckled nervously. "Cameras? In your house? That's absurd. Why would I know anything about that?" His denial felt rehearsed, but I pressed on. "You're the only person who's been in my house recently. Please, Mr. Henderson, if you know something, just tell me." He sighed, his shoulders slumping. "All right, come inside. We should talk." Reluctantly, I followed him into his living room. It was neat and cozy, with bookshelves lined with engineering manuals and family photos. He gestured for me to sit, but my heart was pounding too hard to relax. "What I'm about to tell you," he began, "isn't easy to explain." Mr. Henderson settled into his armchair, his hands clasped tightly as if holding onto an invisible thread of courage, his gaze fixed on the floor, and his usually warm, confident demeanor seemed to crack under an unseen weight. "I never meant for things to go this far," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're not the only one I've watched." My breath caught in my throat. Not the only one? The revelation sent a chill racing down my spine. I leaned forward, gripping the edge of the armrest. "What do you mean, Mr. Henderson?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. He looked up, his eyes clouded with guilt. "It started as a project," he admitted, "a way to stay sharp after retiring. I built these cameras myself. At first, they were just for monitoring the neighborhood, keeping an eye on things, you know? But what?" I interrupted, unable to contain my growing anger. He sighed deeply, his gaze dropping again. "It became an obsession. I started placing them in places I shouldn't have. I told myself it was harmless, that I wasn't hurting anyone, but I crossed a line with you." His confession left me speechless. The man I had trusted to help me fix a leaky faucet, the man who smiled warmly at every passerby, had invaded my life in ways I couldn't fathom. "Why me?" I finally asked, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and betrayal. "You reminded me of my daughter," he said quietly. "She moved away years ago, and we don't speak much anymore. I guess I wanted to feel connected to someone again." His explanation was unsettling. It didn't justify his actions, but it painted a picture of loneliness and desperation. Still, I couldn't forgive him, not yet. "You violated my privacy, Mr. Henderson," I said, standing up. "I trusted you. This isn't something I can just forget." "I understand," he said, his voice heavy with remorse. "I'll remove the cameras immediately, and if you want to go to the police, I won't stop you." I turned to leave, but a nagging thought stopped me. Was he telling the full truth, or was there more he wasn't saying? Back at home, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about his confession didn't add up. If he'd only wanted to feel connected, why were the cameras placed in such invasive spots? Why not just monitor the front yard or living room? Sarah's words echoed in my mind. Sometimes the people we least suspect are the ones hiding the most. Determined to uncover the full story, I decided to do some digging. The next day, I began researching Mr. Henderson's past. His cheerful exterior had always made him seem like an open book, but the more I looked, the more questions I uncovered. For starters, there was no record of him working for the engineering firms he claimed to have been with. His supposed daughter didn't appear on any public records either. It was as if his entire life was a carefully crafted illusion. Fueled by suspicion, I concocted a plan to search his house when he wasn't home. It wasn't something I was proud of, but I needed answers. On a Friday afternoon, I watched from my window as Mr. Henderson drove off, presumably for his weekly grocery run. Armed with a lock-picking kit Sarah had lent me, I slipped into his house. Everything looked normal at first glance, but as I moved deeper into the house, I noticed subtle inconsistencies, furniture slightly out of place, a faint chemical smell lingering in the air. Then I found the door to the basement. The handle was locked, but the lock was old and easy to pick. As the door creaked open, a wave of cold, stale air washed over me. Descending the stairs, I felt the weight of the unknown pressing down on me. The basement was a stark contrast to the cozy living room upstairs. Shelves lined the walls, filled with tools, wires, and more cameras. But what caught my attention was a table in the center of the room. On it lay a stack of photographs, pictures of me. The photos weren't just recent snapshots, they spanned years. Some showed me at my old apartment, others at work, even at my childhood home. My hands trembled as I flipped through them, realizing with dawning horror that Mr. Henderson had been watching me long before we became neighbors. A journal lay beside the photographs, its pages filled with meticulous notes about my daily routines, my habits, even my fears. Each entry painted a chilling picture of a man who knew far more about me than I'd ever shared. Suddenly, the sound of a door creaking upstairs made my blood run cold. Mr. Henderson was back. I froze, clutching the journal to my chest. My mind raced. How could he be back so soon? My plan had been carefully timed, but something had clearly gone wrong. Footsteps echoed from above, slow and deliberate, as if he already knew someone was in his house. I scanned the room for a place to hide. The basement was cluttered, but not enough to conceal me effectively. A tall shelf stood near the far wall, casting a shadow large enough to crouch behind. I slipped into the space, my heart pounding in my ears. "Who's there?" Mr. Henderson's voice called, calm but laced with an edge of menace. I held my breath as his steps descended the creaky staircase. The faint light from the single bulb above made the shadows dance eerily around the room. He reached the bottom and stopped, his eyes scanning the basement. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice dropping to a chilling whisper. I realized hiding wasn't an option anymore. Gripping the journal tightly, I stepped out from behind the shelf. "What is this, Mr. Henderson?" I demanded, holding up the stack of photos. "Why do you have these?" His face darkened, the warmth that once characterized him replaced by something cold and calculating. "I didn't want you to find out this way," he said, almost regretfully. "But you forced my hand." "Forced your hand?" I spat. "You've been stalking me, watching me for years. Why, Mr. Henderson? Why would you do this?" He sighed, as if burdened by a secret too heavy to bear. "Because you remind me of someone I lost," he said, "but not my daughter. Someone far more important." Confusion warred with fear. "Who?" He hesitated, then spoke a name I didn't recognize. "Eleanor." "Eleanor was everything to me," he said, his voice trembling with emotion. "We were engaged, ready to start a life together, but she was taken from me, stolen by someone like you." "Someone like me?" I repeated, my mind spinning. "She looked like you," he continued, his eyes distant. "Same smile, Same laugh. You're her mirror image. When I first saw you, it was like she'd come back to me. A sick realization dawned on me. This wasn't about affection or loss, it was about obsession. He had built a fantasy around me, conflating my existence with a woman who had died decades ago. That doesn't justify invading my life, I shouted, backing toward the stairs. You don't understand, he said, his tone darkening. I've been waiting for a second chance, and now that I have it, I won't let you leave. Panic surged as he moved closer, blocking the stairway. Please, Mr. Henderson, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. You don't want to do this. Let me go, and we can talk to someone, get you help. He laughed bitterly. Help? I don't need help. I need you to understand that this is fate. You're meant to be here. I spotted a wrench on the workbench to my left. Without hesitation, I lunged for it, gripping the cold metal tightly. Stay back, I warned, raising the wrench. He paused, his expression unreadable. For a moment, I thought he might back down, but then he lunged. I swung the wrench instinctively, the sound of metal meeting flesh reverberating through the basement. He staggered, clutching his head, giving me just enough time to dart past him and up the stairs. As I burst into the living room, I heard him recovering below, his heavy footsteps following close behind. I ran for the front door, fumbling with the lock, but it wouldn't budge. Don't make this harder than it has to be, he shouted, his voice echoing from the basement stairs. Desperation fueled me. I grabbed a decorative vase from a nearby table and hurled it through the window. The glass shattered, and I scrambled through the jagged frame, ignoring the cuts on my arms and legs. Outside, the night was eerily silent. I ran toward my house, the adrenaline masking the pain. Behind me, I could hear him shouting, but he didn't follow. Safe inside my house, I locked every door and window, my mind racing. I called Sarah and the police, recounting everything in frantic detail. The officers arrived within minutes, but when they entered Mr. Henderson's house, they found it empty. The basement was spotless, no photos, no journal, no cameras. It was as if he'd never existed. Weeks passed, and I tried to move on, but the scars remained, both physical and emotional. Then one night, I found a note slipped under my door. You're still mine. The handwriting was unmistakable. The note in my hand felt heavier than any object I'd ever held. My blood ran cold as the realization hit me. Mr. Henderson was still out there, watching, waiting, but how had he slipped through the police's grasp so completely? I rushed to call Sarah. Her voice was calm but firm. We'll figure this out, she assured me, but for now, you can't stay alone. Come to my place. I packed a bag with trembling hands and drove to her apartment. The familiar streets felt alien, every shadow a potential threat. Once there, Sarah helped me install extra locks and security cameras in my own home, vowing to monitor the feeds until we found answers. But that night, as I tried to sleep, my phone buzzed. It was an email, no subject, no sender, only one attachment, a photo of me, taken through Sarah's window. The photo confirmed what I feared. He had followed me, but how did he always stay one step ahead? Sarah, a tech expert, took the email to a friend of hers, a hacker who specialized in tracing digital footprints. After hours of work, he uncovered a chilling detail. Mr. Henderson wasn't just watching me, he had somehow hacked into the very cameras Sarah and I had installed. This guy's a ghost, the hacker said, shaking his head. No social security, no online presence. It's like he wiped his existence clean. As Sarah and I stared at each other in disbelief, my phone buzzed again. Another email, this time with a video. It showed Mr. Henderson in his living room, speaking directly into the camera. Stop running, he said, his tone calm yet sinister. You can't escape what's meant to be. Terrified but determined, Sarah and I devised a plan. If he could watch us, we could watch him. The hacker set up a system to trace any future emails or messages, hoping to pinpoint his location. Days turned into weeks with no sign of him. I started to believe he had given up until one night, my doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I saw a delivery driver holding a package. It's for you, the driver said, oblivious to the danger. Reluctantly, I opened the door. Inside the package was an old photo album, filled with pictures of Eleanor, Henderson's fiancée, but interspersed among the photos were candid shots of me, taken without my knowledge over the past year. A note fell out as I flipped through the pages. Let's meet where it all began. I knew exactly where he meant, his house. Against Sarah's protests, I decided to face him. armed with a hidden recording device and the knowledge that the police were stationed nearby, ready to intervene. The house was eerily quiet as I stepped inside, the air thick with tension. "I'm here," I called out, my voice trembling. From the shadows, Mr. Henderson emerged. He looked older, more fragile, but his eyes burned with a dangerous intensity. "You've come," he said, almost tenderly. "I knew you would." "This ends now," I said, trying to mask my fear. "You need help, and I can't give it to you." His smile faltered. "Help? You don't understand. I've been waiting for this moment. You and I were connected. It's fate." As he stepped closer, the sound of sirens filled the air. Henderson's face twisted in anger. "You betrayed me," he hissed, lunging toward me. The police stormed in, pulling him away as he screamed my name. Relief washed over me as I watched him being restrained, but something about his words haunted me. Later that night, as I returned home, I found my phone buzzing with a new notification. It was a live feed. Henderson, sitting calmly in an interrogation room, staring directly into the camera. "I told you," he said, his voice eerily composed. "You're still mine." The screen went black, but a single message appeared: "This isn't over." My heart sank as I stared at the tiny camera nestled among the books, its lens like an unblinking eye. How had it gotten here? Henderson was locked away, or so I thought. I immediately called Sarah, who arrived within minutes. Together, we dismantled the device and examined it. Sarah's face turned pale as she identified the model. "This isn't just any camera," she whispered. "This is military grade. Whoever placed this here isn't working alone, they're organized." We took the camera to her hacker friend, who, after hours of tinkering, made a chilling discovery. The feed from the camera wasn't directed to Henderson's known devices. It was streaming to multiple IP addresses scattered across the globe, a network of watchers. "These are encrypted signals," the hacker explained, his voice tense. "This isn't some isolated stalker. This is a coordinated operation. Henderson is just a pawn in something much bigger." Determined to find answers, Sarah and I delved into Henderson's past. We unearthed fragments of his life that painted a far more sinister picture. He had worked on secretive government surveillance projects during his engineering career, designing cutting-edge equipment. When his wife passed, something snapped in him, and he began using his expertise for his own obsessions. But he wasn't alone. Henderson had been part of an underground community, people who believed in absolute control over others, using technology to manipulate and dominate lives. They called themselves the Observers. The Observers thrived on secrecy. Members were scattered worldwide. Their only connection is shared ideology, power through omniscience. Despite Henderson's incarceration, the network's reach remained strong. One night, I received an anonymous package at my doorstep. Inside was a USB drive and a note, "For your eyes only." Reluctantly, I plugged it into my computer. The screen filled with grainy footage, clips of me from years ago, long before Henderson had entered my life. At parks, grocery stores, even childhood birthday parties, someone had been watching me for a long time. Then, a video started playing. It was Henderson, sitting in his prison cell. "I warned you," he said, his voice steady. "You've only seen the surface. They're everywhere. And now, they've chosen you." Fear turned into resolve. I couldn't live like this anymore. Sarah and I decided to go on the offensive. We enlisted the help of the hacker and a private investigator to track down other members of the Observers. Our investigation led us to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. It was filled with monitors displaying live feeds of countless homes and public spaces. Each screen bore a small insignia of an eye, the Observer's symbol. Before we could gather evidence, the warehouse was set ablaze. We barely escaped, coughing through the smoke. It was clear, they knew we were coming. The deeper we dug, the more dangerous it became. Sarah's car was tampered with, causing a near-fatal accident. The hacker's apartment was ransacked, his equipment destroyed. My own home was broken into, though nothing was stolen, just rearranged to remind me they had been there. One night, a man approached me on the street, dressed in a sharp suit. He exuded an aura of authority. "You're in over your head," he said, handing me a business card with nothing but an eye symbol on it. "Stop now, or you'll regret it." But I couldn't stop, not after what they had done to me. Months of relentless pursuit led us to a hidden bunker deep in the woods. It was the nerve center of the Observers. Sarah, the hacker, and I infiltrated it with a plan to destroy their servers and expose them to the world. What we found inside was more horrifying than we imagined. Files upon files on thousands of people, each meticulously catalogued, plans for infiltration, manipulation, and control. As we planted the malware to wipe their systems, alarms blared, armed guards stormed the bunker, a chaotic escape ensued, with Sarah and the hacker barely making it out alive. The bunker's destruction was a blow to the observers, but not a fatal one. They retaliated by releasing edited footage of me online, framing me as a criminal. My reputation was shattered, my life turned upside down. But I refused to let them win. I went public with the truth, sharing everything we had uncovered. While many dismissed me as paranoid, others began to see the cracks in the facade of safety. Years later, as I tried to rebuild my life, a familiar package arrived at my doorstep. Inside was a note, scrawled in Henderson's handwriting. "You thought it was over. It never is." The camera lens inside the box reflected my horrified face. And just like that, I realized I was never free.